Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. I'd like to welcome members and officers to this extraordinary Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting and welcome anyone watching online. Before the meeting starts, I'd like to invite the committee member and scrutiny officer to explain how proceedings will work and to undertake a roll call of those attending remotely.
If a member wishes to speak, they should use the speak button located on their microphone unit. The microphone will light up green and the chair will be alerted to their request to speak. When the chair invites you to speak, your microphone will be made live and will turn red. At this point, you can speak. The normal procedure rules in respect of debate and times to speak will apply. Voting. When requested to vote, voting will be done via the yes, no, abstain button on your microphone unit. Details of how members voted will be shown on the screens around the room and the results will be visible on the YouTube live stream. In the event of a tie, the chair's vote will be the casting vote. Are there any questions before we start the meeting? No, I'll hand back to the chair then.
Thank you, Amy. So item 1, apologies for absence. No apologies for absence have been received. Item 2, Chair's announcements. In accordance with Council policy, this meeting is being recorded. The recording will be available both on the Council's YouTube channel as well as on the Council's ModGov site alongside the documents from this meeting. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. The detailed reminder about this and speaking rights is set out under Chair's announcements on the agenda. For the purposes of clarification, 4.8.23a of the Constitution does not apply to this meeting. Therefore, a member may leave the room during the debate and consideration of that item and be able to vote. However, please be mindful of the business on the agenda and wherever possible, leave at an appropriate point in the proceedings. Members are reminded that we have adopted a scrutiny charter which outlines how we conduct scrutiny at North Herts Council, including the need for independence, initiative and integrity. It is important that all members are mindful of this and how they approach the items on the agenda tonight and at future meetings. Full details on the adopted charter can be found on the Council's intranet page for members. Item 3, public participation. There is no public participation. Item 4, decarbonisation of leisure centres contract award update. Councillor Mick Debenham to present.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for letting us come to you tonight for this extraordinary meeting, and thank you for all the members who thought they'd been done for the year. So sorry about that. Before I go on, I think it's only right to congratulate dual councillors Munster and Bartois for their success last week. Good luck going forward. Right, I take it you've all read the report, but for the benefit of the tape, I shall read a statement. Members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee will be aware that back in February 2024, we were awarded £7.74 million of grant funding from Salix for decarbonisation of our 3 leisure centres in Royston, Hitchin and Letchworth. Since then, the Council have been working with Wilmot Dixon Construction Limited on the project all the way through feasibility, surveys and detailed design. As well as the works to decarbonise the leisure centres, the project also incorporates an extension to the gym and a refurbishment of the Change Village at Royston and a new Change Village at North Herts Leisure Centre. On the 24th of March 2025, Wilmot Dixon submitted a provisional contract sum of £15.895 million to the Council. This is currently being considered and negotiated on our behalf by our quantity surveyor, Varsity Consulting. A final figure will be presented to Cabinet on the 20th of May, where Cabinet will consider the construction contract award decision. You will note at paragraph 8.8 that due to the requirements of the Salix grant funding, early orders had to be placed, and therefore the spend to date on the project is £6.709 million. Unfortunately, due to the significant scale of works, there will be some disruption to customers at the leisure centres. Everyone active have been given an indicative figure for the revenue impact, which the Council will have to incur, of approximately £900,000. However, this is based on an early programme which is still being worked on. There may well be some improvements to the programme, for example, keeping the learner pooler open at North Herts when the main pool is closed. Also, it is possible that the week-long site closures planned for substation works may be shorter. Everyone active will also look at redeploying staff and other operational efficiencies wherever possible, such as turning down pool temperatures during closure periods to bring down costs. One of the most significant issues identified is regards to the works to install insulation and solar PV to the roof at Hitchin. This will unfortunately require a 23-week partial closure. That's from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. on Monday to Friday, but with a 2-week full reopening over Christmas to allow the works to be carried out safely. A number of options were considered for Hitchin, but this was deemed to be the best solution, as it would mean that all of the swimming lessons which take place from 4 p.m. onwards can still take place, as well as being fully open at weekends. At its meeting on the 20th of May, Cabinet will also be asked to consider extending the outdoor pool sessions at Letchworth to coincide with the indoor pool closure there and at Hitchin until the end of October to accommodate some of the swimmers affected by the partial closure. The full programme will be finalised in the next few weeks, and meanwhile, comprehensive communication plans are being drawn up. While we fully appreciate this project will cause some inconvenience to leisure centre customers in the short term, this is a hugely ambitious decarbonisation project which will take us a significant step closer to achieving our climate targets and will also ensure these facilities remain fit for purpose for many years to come. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Debenham. Are there any questions? Councillor Munzer.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Councillor Debenham, for your best wishes. Very much looking forward to that new challenge. But drawing us back to what's before us tonight, I seem to recall when this came to overview and scrutiny a couple of months ago, or very much at the start of this process, myself and colleagues asked what the potential cost implications for would be for, you know, closures, etc., of the pools, because, you know, it's just common sense that, you know, there would be some disruption to the operations of everyone active at the leisure centres, and therefore there'll be a cost implication. And we effectively were told, don't worry, it's going to be minimal, it's not going to be significant. Now, nearly £1 million, I would argue, is very significant. So why are we just being made aware of this now? Why wasn't this spotted and flagged and identified sooner?
When we started the project, we were led to believe that the work on Hitchin could be done from above and there'd be no closures at all. And subsequently, Wilmot Dixon felt that the roof was not man enough, and it wasn't worth the risk for somebody, God forbid, or something falling down onto the people below. And we've gone through endless options as to try and keep it open as best as possible. They wanted a complete closure for 19 weeks, and we've negotiated a partial closure, which will keep a lot of people happy, a lot of people miserable. I get that, but I think this is the best solution. And with the extended hours of the outdoor pools as well to alleviate, but this was just, unfortunately, this wasn't seen. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Sarah?
Yes, thank you. Sarah Kingsley, Director for Environment. I think, as Councillor Monser said, at the beginning of the project, we weren't aware that there would be significant closures. We thought there would be some disruption, but we weren't aware of the scale of disruption, because it only as the detailed design has progressed that Wilmot Dixon themselves, and as Wilmot Dixon themselves have tried to mitigate some of those issues that these things have arisen. However, and I do fully take your point that £900,000 is a significant amount of money, but we have only recently had those figures from everyone active. We didn't have those figures at the last meeting. The Hitchin issue itself has added on the partial closure at Hitchin has added on a lot to the figures we had before, because as Councillor Debenham said, at one point we didn't think there was going to be any closure of the Hitchin pool, but there are substantial closures across all three sites, and unfortunately it's things like where the pools are going to be exposed to the elements, so where they're installing, you know, the new insulation, the new glazing, they just can't keep them open. there's multiple reasons for it, but as I say, we've only become aware of it as the detailed design has progressed.
Thank you. Councillor Peace.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions, if I may. Firstly, I know we had a brief discussion about this earlier, but could you just explain why the closure can't happen over the summer so that the outdoor pool is available to take up the slack? And do you want me to do the second question as well? Will people who use the centre be given a rebate on their memberships because the pool isn't available when they want to use it?
Yeah, I can answer both of those questions. Hitchin has to be delayed because we're waiting on a BAT survey to come through. Yeah. With regards to swimming and gym membership, whilst their particular gym/pool is closed, members will not be charged, and they will also be able to go to any other Everyone Active site, not just in North Herts, but anywhere in the country, free of charge.
Councillor Dennis.
Thank you very much. I think my question follows on from Councillor Peace's quite neatly, thinking about the compensation and also the costs of the closure. I appreciate the offer that's being made to members, and I hope that is able to capture and maintain their memberships once the centres reopen. But obviously, some of these closure times, for example, the sports hall reduction for 14 weeks which one's that? In Royston, North Herts Leisure Centre, the gym capacity being reduced for a significant period of time as well. I think that's for 11 weeks. And obviously the partial closure of the swimming pool at Hitchin, that sort of thing. We could end up with members taking advantage of our very broad, very diverse health and leisure sector and a lot of the access to competitively priced providers. Have you factored in the risk of customer attrition to the potential revenue losses, and what strategies are going to be employed to try and retain and then boost membership once the closures and the works are completed?
Obviously, our conversations are ongoing with Everyone Active, but it's difficult to say because from their perspective, it's kind of on a case-by-case basis. So, there'll be some hirers that they're confident will come back, in the sports halls, etc. And there are, for example, North Herts Leisure Centre, when the pool closes, the proposal is to keep the outdoor pool open at the same time and to try and transfer some of the regular hirers of North Herts Leisure Centre pool, so perhaps some of the swim clubs, over to the outdoor pool if they wish to. If they don't wish to, then that's fine, but we just can't predict that at the minute. Things like school swimming lessons in Hitchin, fully appreciate that, for example, a lot of those children will walk, so their teachers may not wish for them to transfer to another site. However, those conversations will be had as to whether they want to have less of their lessons at North Herts or even at Stevenage. We're very lucky, I think, to have Everyone Active as our operator, given that they've got sites that are not just ours. They do have the kind of multiple sites where they can offer people their facilities. In terms of loss of income moving forwards, it's just really difficult to predict. However, our management fee is fixed, and we've had no pushback from Everyone Active in terms of once those closures have happened. We've not had any conversations with Everyone Active about that moving forward.
Thank you. Councillor Claydon.
Thank you. I was actually going to ask about school swimming lessons. So I think you've covered that, if people are going to be given the option. So people, maybe just to follow on briefly, a school's going to be contacted proactively so that they're aware. Yeah, okay, you're nodding, so I'll take that as a yes. With regards to the figures, if the figures come from Everyone Active in terms of lost income, and they're essentially saying, this is what we're going to lose, please can we have it from you? Are we scrutinizing those numbers and making sure that they look plausible and reasonable?
Yeah, so the figures that Everyone Active have given us are based on a calculation of loss of income through the leisure management contract. So it's quite a basic calculation. So, for example, a swimming pool cost is X amount per hour or per day. And so that's just literally a multiplication of that in terms of loss of income. However, we have had numerous conversations with Everyone Active, and they have assured us that they are very willing to be flexible on that application of the contract. So, for example, redeploying staff from North Harts Leisure Centre, if the outdoor pool stays open, redeploying some of those staff over there. So then that loss of income will reduce. There's other things that they're looking at, like reducing pool temperatures. So there other things like North Harts Leisure Centre, as an example, they're planning on that we can only serve cold food for a certain amount of time. And so they will look at their figures in terms of what percentage is hot food, etc. There's specific calculations, but they are being quite flexible with us on it and trying to maximize income where they can and reduce costs wherever they can. So, but yes, we are looking at it, and those costs are not final.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Yes, I was just wondering what will happen if the 5% tolerance on the capital budget turns out not to be sufficient to cover any unforeseen issues during the construction period. Will that mean a further increase in the capital budget? I'm just a bit concerned that the time that it might take to make that decision could delay the process and the closures even longer. So, you know, I suppose basically, are we confident about that 5% tolerance?
I've got a long-winded answer if you want. Do you want to hear the long-winded answer? Thank you. The project is a design and build which transfers more of the risk onto the contractor. The contractor has also led the design stages and has undertaken their own surveys and investigations, meaning they have a greater understanding of the scope and the complexity than a contractor would otherwise have if the entire exposure to the project were just a 4-week tender period. A degree of risk still exists, and if there are significant unforeseen issues with the existing structure or delays associated with utility providers, there could potentially be significant costs, but the number of these types of cost headings have been greatly reduced by the procurement route that has been selected. And our quantity surveyors have come up with the same figure as Wilmot Dixon has, and you know, hopefully that's what it will be. But obviously, if it does go higher, we'll have to come back again, cap in hand.
Thank you. Councillor Prescott.
Thank you. I have one question and potentially a supplementary, if I may. Just picking up on what Councillor Debenham just said about this being a design and build contract rather than just a simple subcontractor working to our design. At what point and who advised the council in the early days that there would not be significant closures? And therefore, presumably at some stage, somebody, and I'm assuming it's the contractor, has evaluated, amongst other things, the quality and the structural integrity of the roof. So my question is, who advised the council that, or did the council make that decision off its own bat? You want me to rephrase the question? Whose responsibility is it for the cost if, in fact, there is an additional cost? I mean, there clearly is an additional cost in the loss of earnings that the council is going to have to pick up the cost of. But at what point can somebody turn around to the contractor and say, you need to bear some of this cost as well? I didn't want to spoil the surprise of the supplementary, but that was what
So within the contract, there are some risks. Some of the financial risks moving forwards when we enter into a construction contract are solely on the contractor. So if there is an issue, for example, with their design, then that risk, that results in a problem that means they have to redesign something or reorder something, then that risk is on Wilmot Dixon. It's not on the council. The risk to the council is more on unforeseen issues that haven't arisen during the detailed design process. I think the point that Councillor Debenham was making, though, is the reason that our quantity surveyor is comfortable with us having a 5% contingency is because we have gone through that rigorous process. So therefore, all of the risks, the major risks, should have been drawn out through that process. It's not to say there won't be more issues, but the majority of those will already have been addressed, like the hitching roof, for example.
With all due respect, I didn't really answer the question. Who determined in the first stage that the roof would be sufficiently strong without having to carry out the work, without having to shut the pool? Who made that decision? Was it the council's own people, or was it Wilmot Dixon?
There was never a decision that the roof would be strong enough. It was at the early stages of design. It was as the design progressed, it's as those stages progress, because obviously you go through the feasibility stage, and at that stage they would not have identified the issue with the roof. It's only when they got to detailed design that they recognized the issue with the structural deck, and that's when we were advised of it. So it's not, the council was only advised around the issue of the structural deck. I think it must have been December, January time. But as I say, you have to kind of go through that process in order to identify those issues.
Thank you. Councillor Winchester.
Thank you. I'm interested. This looks like a very complex piece of project management, and my question is about how easy it will be to react or flex if the situation changes. For example, if something else comes up, like the wrong thing gets ordered or delivered, or some other risk is uncovered, are the contractors and everyone active going to be able to respond fairly swiftly to changes in the project management and keep residents and customers of the leisure centres informed about that?
I mean, we obviously have a project board and we have a risk register for the project. So obviously those risks are live, active risks that are being managed. And yes, I think we have weekly meetings with Wilmot Dixon, weekly meetings with everyone active, weekly meetings with Salix, the grant funders. It's fair to say that a lot of the risk actually was in the first. We've already seen a lot of the risk and have got past that. In terms of the biggest risk to the project was always the Salix grant funding and whether we could draw down that money in year one, which we did. That was always going to be the biggest risk. So a lot of those materials, most of them have already been ordered. You know, the air source heat pumps, the solar PV panels, the air handling units, they're already on order. They're already sat in a storage unit. So that side of things is okay. Obviously now we're onto the construction risk, but I mean, yeah, I feel that the project team work really well together. And as I say, we have our risk register, and that's the point of it, isn't it? Is to actively keep it a live risk register and manage that accordingly. As an example, when the hitching roof issue came up, we had multiple project board meetings to discuss solutions for that. We came up with various solutions, and the partial closure was the one we went for. But obviously we did that on an urgent basis and responded accordingly.
Thank you. I'm just going to interject on that part as well. In terms of the communications plan, which is sort of what Claire was referring to, what have you drawn up so far? And who's going to be managing that as it goes out? Is that a council thing to do, or is it everyone active that's going to be leading on it?
So there have been meetings with our communications team, with everyone active, and with Wilmot Dixon. The majority of the communication will be it will be our communication plan ultimately, but obviously from a customer point of view, a lot of those communications to customers will come directly from everyone active, because that's the most appropriate channel to reach them through. But it is very much a coordinated plan with both all three organisations. And as I said previously, it will be very much case by case, closure by closure, because the audiences are slightly different for each. But I can't tell you that it's anywhere near finalised, because it isn't, and that is because the programme itself is not finalised. So they're still working on things like, can we keep the learner pool open when we close the main pool at North Herts? And, you know, the issue around the outdoor pools, that will obviously affect what we do as well. So, but it should be ready within the next few weeks.
Thank you. Councillor Munster.
Thanks, Chair. In terms of pure capital cost, when this scheme was first proposed and first brought before the council, how much were we talking without any variances or buffer built in? And, you know, now we're talking about 16 million. So effectively what I want to know is both that initial figure and how much over budget we are now. Because with no disrespect, we seem to be in a position where, you know, this matter has come before this committee on a number of occasions now, officers and, you know, the executive member looking for additional money, and effectively we can't really afford for that to happen again, because there is a massive amount of slippage on this.
If you refer to paragraph 7.5 of the report, that has the initial budgets in there. So we have the 10.8 million for the core project, and then we've got the additions to that for the bits we've now kind of moved into being part of the overall project. So that detail there in terms of the air handling units, the wet change, and the change bridge refurbishment, and the gym extension. So the sum of all those, which is about 12.5 million, was the original budget when this project started, and then you've got the kind of story through those paragraphs where that's changed since then.
Yeah, please do.
Thank you. And I suppose this isn't necessarily a question for you, Mr. Cooper, but maybe the executive member. Do you think that if we had known that the cost of this project would be over £60 million, do you think we would have done it? Or do you think that we wouldn't have bothered?
Hindsight is fantastic, yeah. It's so difficult to say, Councillor Munster. I mean, you and I know we both, everyone, the whole council thought, wow, you know, all our Christmases have come at once. You know, £7.7 million have come in. A good news story has turned into a ball ache, you know, to be honest with you. But I think we're too far down the road now. We've spent the money. You can either then just have nothing, or just go a little bit extra and get everything, and get a new gym extension at Royston, and 3 leisure centres fit for the next 50, 100 years to bequeath our residents.
Thank you. Councillor Peace.
That's probably a very small amount of money compared to the amounts Councillor Munster was just mentioning. But at 8.3, it says there are costs in addition to the contracting costs, such as storing things in a building in Hitchin for the storage of early ordered materials. I just wondered whether there was any scope to use the new museum building, or whether that is possible to use that yet to save money on paying for other storage costs when we have a storage facility.
I did ask the question of Mr. Crowley about the unit at Works Road. However, my understanding is that it's not ready yet, and those items are already in storage. But we have had some success with that, in that we are partly using the old Iceland unit at Churchgate. So obviously that's in our control. So the cost of that was less, which is how we managed to reduce some of the fees. And we also are using another local storage unit in Letchworth, which again has reduced some of the costs.
Councillor Claydon.
Thank you, Chair. Asbestos is mentioned in the report as one specific risk for the construction stage. I was just wondering how much is currently known about the presence of asbestos in the buildings, and whether in general we're confident that the buildings are in good enough condition, structurally sound in every way that they need to be, and so forth, to support the work based on the surveys that have been done.
In all honesty, it's probably a question I will have to come back to give you a written response on. I'll get a response for you after.
Thank you. Councillor Prescott.
Thank you, Chair. I hate to sound like a stuck record, but if we've got a design and build contract, at what point does Wilmot Dixon actually pick up any of this additional cost? Not just the additional costs that have already been identified, but Lord help us if they find, as Councillor Claydon has mentioned, they find asbestos in the building, or there's some. I mean, I'm minded of the quote that hope is not really a strategy. We really need to know, and we've got a design contractor who presumably did a significant amount of work before they pitched for and accepted the contract. At what point can the council, who, let's remember, the council doesn't have any of its own money, it's all taxpayer money, at what point can the council turn around to the contractor and say, that's on you?
I think it's really referring to my previous answer, to be honest. I would point out we're not actually in a construction contract with Wilmot Dixon. That will happen at the meeting on the 20th of May. The decision will be made as to whether we enter into a construction contract with Wilmot Dixon. The contract we're in at the minute is a pre-construction agreement, which is basically where you go through the whole detailed design process. So in Wilmot, although we've had a cost journey from Wilmot Dixon, contractually they hadn't committed to an actual cost, because obviously they had to go through the detailed design in order to get to a point where we contract with them, and that's where we are in the journey now. As I said, some of the risk is on Wilmot Dixon, so some of that financial risk moving forwards, once we're into the construction contract, will be on Wilmot Dixon. However, the loss of revenue the impact is on the council. It's nothing to do with Wilmot Dixon, because that's outside of the scope of their construction contract. So yeah, but some of the risk is on us. It's the unforeseen, as there always will be in big construction projects. Asbestos being one of them, electrical connections apparently being another. The risk of when you connect the new MEP, the new air source heat pumps, for example, into old electrical connections, apparently is a risk. But they're unforeseen risks that we can't foresee until we get to that point.
Thank you. Councillor Manser.
Forgive me. I mean, I don't have a copy of the public procurement rules, as gripping and as a thrilling read as I'm sure it is. But would you be able to answer the question whether the current legal relationship of which the council is in with Wilmot Dixon in terms of the pre-construction contract, whether that is the norm for this type of public procurement project, or whether it's sort of going in a very odd and unusual direction?
I can let Ian answer if not, but basically we are using a framework, so it's the SCAPE framework for this procurement, so it's all completely above board and usual for these type of contracts, and essentially you go to feasibility, they then give you a cost of all of the works that take you up to the point of construction contract, which is called the pre-construction services agreement. They then do all the REBA stages up to, so that you get to the detailed design, you get through all those issues so that they can then be confident of their construction price. They then give you the construction contract offer, and that's where we are now. So yeah, it's a standard approach.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
So it's kind of just going back to Councillor Prescott's question. I just want to make sure that I understand. So at the moment, we're not in a construction contract. That comes next. When we go into that construction contract, are there no circumstances under which they would be responsible for, closure of the facilities resulting in loss of revenue to us? So nothing that they could find or nothing that they could do that would result in closing any of our facilities and them not being responsible for that?
Sorry, just to clarify, do you mean above and beyond the scale at the closures that we're already looking at?
Yeah, if something else happens, if something else is found that couldn't have been foreseen, or one of them accidentally sets fire to the whole place and burns it down, whatever it is, right?
Yeah. I mean,
because that sounds surprising to me that we bear all that risk.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily talking about the risk of additional closures. I mean, I'm not a contract lawyer at the end of the day, but we are looking, for example, that we're looking at one element of the contract whereby we're trying to put a clause in the contract, for example, to ensure that Wilmot Dixon complete the programme on time, so that the closures we know about are completed within the time period. So that's one element of it. However, caveat to that, we can't do that with weather related events. So hitching roof being the obvious example, doing that through winter. We can't kind of hold Wilmot Dixon to account for not working on a roof if it's icy at the time. However, as I say, there are some elements of the that Wilmot Dixon have a risk for. It's just very difficult to describe what those might be. It's all to do with the design, and if they've not got the design right, then that risk is on them. So if that then results in an impact on the council, then yes, that's Wilmot Dixon's cost, not the council's cost. But I don't want to be particularly specific because, as I said, I'm not a contract lawyer, so I can probably get you a better response on that on email.
Did you have another question? No. Okay. Councillor Prescott.
Thank you. Just going back to Councillor Debenham's point about the when this was originally proposed, and we were talking, and I'm very much round numbers at the moment, we were looking at just under an £8 million grant, and to allow for all the additional the added bits, the extension of the gyms and all the rest of it. Ian just mentioned that the rough number was about £12 million on our original budgets. So in actual fact, the council's taxpayer exposure was about £4 million. And I agree with Councillor Debenham, for £4 million, we're getting an awful lot for our money. We're now looking at a total budget of over 16 million, which means that effectively the taxpayer's cost has more than doubled. At what point is somebody going to stand up and say, we can't afford this, we can't justify it? And I appreciate entirely, we're a long way down the road, we've spent money on it already. But if we had we don't have hindsight, I understand that, but we've still got to look at it and say we are already looking at a doubling in the taxpayer's cost on this. At what point will we say enough is enough?
I don't think we can now, because the conditions of the Salix loan grant is we've had to spend the bulk of it in year one, which is now up. We've spent it. What do? Just leave a load of heat pumps and stuff lying in a warehouse forever? They've got to be used to decarbonise our leisure centres, and we're just going to do everything we can to cut costs. You never know. It might be a glorious winter, right? And they do it 4 weeks early. Who knows? But I think we're too far down the line now to pull the plug. We talked about it, and now I think we've made the decision to go ahead. We've got to go over the finishing line now.
Thank you. Councillor Manser.
Could I just follow on from what Councillor Prescott was saying there, and what you yourself, Councillor Devlin, was saying in terms of, we talked about it. So would we be able to have a better understanding of the nature and the depth of the discussions of which you've had as a team as to the host of different options, including pulling the plug on this project and the potential costs associated with those options?
I would imagine we've got minutes of all those meetings and when they were, and we can circulate them, I guess. I guess that's fair. Can we do that?
Yeah, sure.
We had a meeting on the 27th of March, which was very much one of making the final decision, because the Salix money had to be spent by the end of March. So literally it was a case of the next day, the heat pumps had to be ordered. And at that meeting, we talked. Sarah brought all the possibilities that have been discussed. Things like having a dome, which was £300,000, and so on. And so we had those figures, and we looked in terms of what would happen if we actually stopped the project there then, which meant we would never be able to do it again. We'd never be able to afford it again. And then if we went with this, the fact that we then would have to follow it through very, very closely to make sure that the figures didn't rocket out of control. Now, I'm giving the figures because we're only talking about the 27th of March, and now we're only on the 6th of May. And our next meeting on that was on the 22nd of April. 22nd of April, and that is when the fact that we might be talking about a 900k revenue loss was actually brought to the meeting. So it has all happened in a very, very short amount of time.
I mean, I can see the point that this has all happened at pace. And obviously, because of the nature of the project and the timescales, it has had to be delivered as such. But at that meeting on the 27th of March, was it cheaper to proceed with this project, or was it cheaper to pull the plug and not complete it? In just general financial terms, obviously, I can see the point that, it was a fantastic grant and we wouldn't be able to do it on our own. And obviously there are associated environmental benefits. But in terms of pure, cold, hard cash, was it cheaper to pull the plug or was it cheaper to proceed?
Can I just say that the meeting on the, whatever date it was in March, 27th of March, was specifically regarding pulling the plug on Hitchin rather than the whole project. So they were, as Councillor Bryant said, there were various options discussed. But at the time, at the first meeting we had in March regarding the Hitchin issue, the option available to us was accept a full 20-week closure at Hitchin, or basically don't do Hitchin. We then had various other solutions. We had the partial closure, or it was don't do Hitchin. In terms of the cost side of things, I'm not trying to be difficult about it, but it's impossible to say whether it would be cheaper to have pulled the plug, because at the end of the day, if you don't do it now, at some point, if we want to meet our climate targets, you will have to install air source heat pumps. You will have to do the fabric of those buildings, and you'd have to do that without a Salix grant, because that's what it comes down to. So yeah, it's impossible to say. The other option is you put in new gas boilers, and that was part of the decision making, because the gas boilers at Hitchin and Letchworth are on their last legs, and we've been told that they cannot be maintained for much longer. So in order to meet our climate targets, if we put in new gas boilers, A, we won't meet our targets, but B, we won't ever be eligible in the next 10 years for more public sector decarbonisation funding. So I know that doesn't answer your question, but there's so many variables in this that it's impossible to say what the cheaper in the short term would be. Don't do Hitchin. Cheaper in the long term, probably not.
That there'd be a significant financial impact. This is just about Hitchin. £3 million for Hitchin would be lost. 300,000 of our money had already been spent. Some materials had been ordered, and we'd still need to replace 2 gas boilers. And we would our sustainable infrastructure, the future would be lost if we didn't continue. So that was the notes I took when I was chairing the meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Bryant. Councillor Dennis.
Thank you, Chair. I suspect Sarah's given part of an answer to this question already, based on what she said about the gas boilers, but the start for these works and their anticipated operation, reading the table, obviously Hitchin, it references Christmas in there. So I'm assuming this is work that's going to be planned for winter 25. And is there, given the weather conditions that we were discussing around working safety, is there a reason why the works couldn't be pushed back to, say, spring, summer 26, when the weather conditions might be more favourable?
Yes, there is a reason, and that is, again, Salix grant funding. So yes, the works for Hitchin specifically are scheduled from October onwards. Because of the bat issue, ultimately, is why we couldn't do it earlier. And we can't do it next spring, summer, because then we wouldn't get the rest of our Salix funding. So unfortunately, we are stuck with the completing the decarbonisation works prior to the end of March.
Just following on from that, could you just clarify when the works are expected to start on the other centres?
Yes, so Royston is first. So Royston starts in July. I think North Hart starts in September, and Hitchin, I think some of the works might start end of September, Hitchin early October.
Okay, thank you. And I think you mentioned this already, but in terms of existing members during the closures and partial closures, are they entitled to any form of refund? You also said around access to other Everyone Active centres. Where are those?
Yeah, so they won't get a refund, but they won't be charged. So because we'll know when those closures are going to happen, Everyone Active will just not take payment for those weeks. So they'll take like a pro rata payment for whatever proportion of the month, and they won't be charged, and they'll be entitled to use any Everyone Active centre during those periods where they can't access their own gym, etc. So the local ones to us are Stevenage, North Herts, Royston, Hertford, Bishop Stortford, St Albans, Hemel. There's a lot of them. That's the bonus. Central Beds have got Everyone Active as well. So yeah, there's plenty of sites to choose from.
Thank you. Councillor Winchester.
Following on from that, is it the case that there's always going to be one pool at least in full operation in the district?
Yes, there will be. There is a small, I believe, overlap between the Royston pool closure and the North Herts Leisure Centre pool closure, but it's not the full extent. Again, it needs to be finalised. I think it might be a week. but there's no overlap between the North Herts Leisure Centre pool closure and the Hitchin partial closure. So obviously that's good news for those people who swim between 8 and 4 at Hitchin, that they can access North Herts during that time.
Just if I may, Chair, and is the same true for the gyms and other facilities as well? Have you looked at the whole package?
I can't say with complete confidence at this stage, but yes, I think, yeah, I'd have to double check the programme, to be honest, but yeah, they are staggered, the programmes, and again, Wilmot Dixon have taken advice from everyone active on around trying to plan those closures. So for example, everyone active really did not want North Herts Leisure Centre pool to close over the school summer holidays, because obviously that's the big family leisure centre, and so they pushed back those works to September to make sure that we avoided that. And so some of that work has been done to make sure that we're avoiding certain busy times. And but yeah, I can't guarantee that there won't be overlap, but it's definitely not exactly the same time.
Samantha?
So could I just focus on the budgetary implications of this? So obviously, you know, £900,000. How are we going to cover that loss? Is it going to be coming from our reserves?
Yeah, it will come from our general fund reserves. As you're aware from our medium-term financial strategy and our budget, our projection is that we'll still have quite a substantial amount more than the recommended minimum balance in there. So therefore that can be absorbed from within that.
Okay. Are we looking at potentially recouping the cost of this through reducing other efforts in terms of what the council's doing to tackle climate change in order to try and have some sort of, you know, equivalence? Because, you know, we're spending, this is a £900,000 cost in order to tackle climate change. Is there anywhere else within the budgets that, you know, where we've got an officer who's doing something or other, or there's another scheme that we can perhaps cancel in order to ensure that the money is then diverted to this, so that the loss or the budgetary implication is less than over 900,000?
That would be something for the council to consider as part of the next budget setting process, whether to stop doing anything that we're currently doing. It's not a kind of net result from this project to be able to then just say we'll just stop doing something else instead. That's a decision for council to take in setting next year's budget, and to determine the same we should stop doing. Obviously, if we want to achieve net zero by 2030, if we stop doing stuff, it makes that less likely to be achieved.
Thank you. Councillor Winchester.
If we are, this might be a question for Chair, actually. It feels like this is something that we're going to want to have another look at and keep a close eye on. So do we have a timetable or a plan for reviewing this again at some point in the future?
We certainly can. There's a work programming session next week where we'll be talking about our plan for at least the first few meetings, if not the whole year of the next year. So, yeah. Are there any further questions? No. Okay. In that case, we'll move to the recommendations, which are that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee notes the projected provisional increase in the capital budget to £16.166 million. That Overview and Scrutiny notes the current estimated one-off revenue impact of £900,000 in 2025-26 through loss of income due to partial and full facility closures, and that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee note and provide comment to Cabinet on the report. I'll propose that. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Dennis.
Yes, Chair. Thank you very much. Happy to second, and I'm happy to speak now as well. And I think it's worthwhile the committee acknowledging the amount of hard work that's been put into this project over from its inception all the way through by officers, and both Councillor Debenham and Councillor Jarvis in their roles as portfolio holders. It's not been easy, has it? It's been a real tough one. There's been a lot of challenges. We've talked about the timetable and how that's impacted. And while I do have concerns and reservations that residents in Royston and the communities around that area who have obviously lost swimming facilities will now have to travel all the way through to Hitchin because of the overlap in the closures between Royston and North Herts Leisure Centre. I understand the reasons for that, as Sarah's sort of explained the challenges on the build out timetables and the loan dates. I am concerned about the budget increasing. I don't think that this is going to be this council's HS2. I do trust our officers and the team that we've got working on this to keep oversight of it. And I do think, as Councillor Winchester suggested, it's worthwhile this committee continuing to keep an eye on this, as well as also referencing the comms plan as well. I think that the initial comms issues we had when the contract started have been overcome. I think most people have transitioned and adapted, moved over to the app. And Everyone Active's app is really good at sending through notifications when there are issues with leisure centres. So I'm hopeful that would be beneficial, but I do think that scrutiny of comms plans and just making sure that we are applying the lessons learned from the past is something that it's advisable to take forward on this. So guys, I'm very happy to second the proposal and the recommendations in this report, with, you know, noting some of the wider concerns that have come out in questioning.
Thank you, Councillor Dennis. Are there any other who want to speak? Councillor Munster.
Thank you. I mean, look, what colleagues have said tonight are, you know, of comments of which are completely and utterly valid. And I will wholly concede the point that, you know, if we didn't have the Salex grant, we wouldn't be able to do this. Okay. However, what is really quite concerning is that the costs do seem to be spiraling out of control on this project. And we really need to, what I'm not convinced about is actually that this is the final total. You know, we might potentially have a situation where Wilmot Dixon find, you know, existing faults or additional faults, and therefore the costs are going to rack up. So we need to make sure, obviously, that the contract of which we sign with Wilmot Dixon in terms of the construction contract is very solid on that. It is preferable to this authority, and I have no doubt that our contract lawyers at the council will do their absolute best to make sure that that contract is incredibly solid and secure for us. But we really do need to keep this under review. We need frequent reporting as to and updating as to the progress of which has been made on this. And it is getting to the stage where I would accept reluctantly it is probably too late for us to pull the plug, and we on balance we probably have to, you know, see this to completion. But we really do need to make sure that we're having cost savings and efficiencies elsewhere within the project, and that officers and contractors are very much focused on that, and that cost, as well as obviously safety first and foremost, is their number one driver when they're engaging in this project.
Thank you, Councillor Munster. Are there any other contributions you want to make? Okay, I think, okay, Councillor Prescott.
Yeah, I would echo what Councillor Munster has said. I agree that it does seem that pulling the plug is just not viable now. But I am concerned that even what we've heard this evening, with the best will in the world, and I know the officers are not wandering around with their eyes closed, but there are bound to be cost overruns that we haven't even contemplated yet. And I'm just concerned on behalf of the taxpayers that Wilmot Dixon or whoever feels that they've got a bit of a blank check to go wild with our money. And I agree with Councillor Munster that the contract that we eventually signed with Wilmot Dixon is as solid as can possibly be, and that it shifts as many of the unforeseen risks over to the people who should be foreseeing them.
Thank you, Councillor Prescott. Councillor Peace.
Yeah, and I think we should just make sure as well that we acknowledge that there are people out there who use these leisure centres for their physical health, for their mental health, and that we make sure that the comms plan ensures that we don't only use the app, good as it may be, that we make sure there are things on Everyone Active's website, on our website, that there are things in local media, so that everybody who uses these centres is well aware of what's going on, what the alternative offers are for them, just so that everybody is included in these plans.
Councillor Williams.
I think it's also worth noting in those comms and noting amongst ourselves that absolutely, yes, the costs are really important. You know, that's important to get that contract right. It's not the only value driver of this project. A massive value driver is the net zero. And so we need to reiterate that. Yes, there are cost increases and we don't want to be profligate, but this is a net zero project that we've got a lot of grant funding for, so got to call that out.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I was going to speak on this, but you've all done an excellent job, so I won't. Thank you very much, and thanks to Councillor Debenham and officers for support. We'll move to the vote on this now, please, Amy.
That motion's carried.
Okay, thank you. Just before we close, just a quick reminder, next week's work programming planning session is open to all members of the committee and all prospective members as well. So if anybody is looking to join the committee next year, please let them know. There's also a questionnaire that's gone out to members as well to help inform the planning for the planning session and the training that's provided there. So please fill that in if you haven't already. Okay, with that, we'll close the meeting. The last one of the civic year, definitely this time. And I'll see you all in a few. I'll see you all next week. Thank you. Bye bye.